As you know, my name is Reed Price. I'm the director of the Senior Center, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all again here. If you are not a member of the Senior Center, consider joining. It's just $20 a year, and we're doing all kinds of activities. We used to do them in person, and we will soon again. But meantime, we're trying to do as many things online as we can. To find out more about us, go to biseniorcenter.org. Thank you very much. This morning, we have the pleasure of a very special guest, a relative neighbor of ours, a member of the Senior Center, and a guy with a very interesting career. At least it seems interesting to us, those of us who haven't been in that line of work. Earl J. Bellamy is retired from the film and TV industry, and he is the son of another film director, Earl A. Bellamy, and he has a sibling who went in the business as well. So, movies and TV are just kind of a homebrew thing with you guys. Welcome, Earl. It's very nice to have you here.
Well, thank you, Reed.
I'd like you to tell us a little bit about what it was like when you were a young person having a very active Hollywood director as your dad. What did that mean for you in terms of growing up?
Well, there was a lot of listening that went on at the dinner table, as you can imagine. But in those times, he was an assistant director at Columbia Pictures. He started there right out of high school in 1935. And in the messaging department, which was kind of the entry level, and there wasn't even a director's guild then. It was about 3 years short of coming into existence, and I hate to admit that I think I've been in it 60 years at this point, but there was no television then, obviously, and so Columbia Pictures was considered one of the low-budget studios. Poverty Row. It was a member of the so-called Poverty Row. Although they had no theater chain, they had to depend on releasing through other organizations like Warner's and Metro and United Artists and outfits like that. But they did make some pictures and some very big ones. And he was considered as he went along as an assistant director. He got into the guild, I think, at about 1942 or 3, and he did some big pictures for him. He did Stars Born with Judy Holliday. I think that was like 1950. He did From Here to Eternity with Burt Lancaster. That would have been in 1952, about in Hawaii, which was a huge undertaking. I mean, pictures didn't go on distant locations of that complication then to speak of. They tried to do as much as they could do in the studio. And the argument always was, well, what do you think we have this studio for? We're not going over there.
I'm sure that was particularly true in a budget-minded studio.
And that's what Columbia was. Well, they all really were. And this was kind of first generation, because these places were owned by the founders. I mean, Harry Cohn was the president of Columbia Pictures in Hollywood, and his brother Jack was the president of the New York office. That's where all the money came from. And the same was the case with the Warner Brothers. I mean, there were 4 brothers Warner, and Harry Warner ran the studio in Hollywood, and Jack Warner ran the company in New York. But they had a chain of theaters, so they were in a little different set of circumstances. They could do exhibition and software manufacturing, so a little different animal. And that all was stopped by the Justice Department in pre-48 or 1948. They had to divest themselves of their chains of theaters because.
So this story of the trouble of big tech is not new.
No, 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 no. And it was just, it wasn't, it was just getting techie then, I mean, in the late 40s, sound was relatively new. Sound came in, they were fiddling with it in the late 20s. The first sound picture was a jazz singer with Al Jolson, which would have been 1920. I think it was released in 29, won an Academy Award in 29, if I'm not mistaken. And sound was an enormous undertaking then. I mean, you couldn't just roll the camera and have it be perfect. I mean, everything, the technology on the set in those times was the sound technicians. I mean, they got to do what they wanted to do, and everybody else had to figure out how to work around it. But yeah, it was, and I would say that in recent times, some of the things, well, certainly pictures like Avatar and things like that use extensive blue screen and all that, green screen, whatever it might be. That's the new tech stuff, but you didn't have that kind of stuff way back when.
But you could use things like use the camera to fool the eye. So I think you were telling me a little bit about like a car chase or something going through the same studio several times.
Oh, sure. Yeah, that happened. And you see it. You see that if you, I'm kind of addicted to Turner Classic Movies. So you see a lot of the old ones on there. And one of the things that we would always do it, especially in a Western, you would overcrank the camera. In other words, run the film through faster than the camera was designed to take it. And the appearance was the action would speed up. And so if you had horses charging in, you would always do that, and then it would look wild, it would look dangerous, whereas it really wasn't necessarily so. But
So,
I think
I want to get back to the question of like, I'm guessing your dad did not take you to Hawaii, but did
he
you?
did.
Pardon?
He did.
Oh, all right. Well, what was that like?
Oh, it was great. I mean, and this was it was, the picture was released in 52, so this was spring of 50. This was late 51, I guess, end of summer 51. And so the war hadn't been over for that long, and the Arizona, the monument for the Arizona was not built. The Arizona was still sunk there, and there were a lot of the derelicts of the Utah was still beached where it had been, and so there were a lot of things there still to remind you of what had gone on. But yeah, we got lucked out. We got taken out of school and got to go to the location, and we would go out with them to the set. Not every day, but occasionally. Schofield Barracks mainly, where they shot a lot of stuff, and they shot all over town, but and you got to know everybody. My brother and I were friends with everybody, and then that happened not all the time, but occasionally. I remember we spent a whole summer up in Sonora in the gold country. That would have been in the 50s. He was up there. It was his first, it was a big break for him. He directed the whole Lone Ranger series, 1954. And does anybody know who Clayton Moore was?
Sure.
Okay. Yeah, he was the Lone Ranger. Yeah. And
so did you have occasion to get to know him a little bit?
a little bit, it was an interesting thing, Reed. He lived about 4 blocks from us in the San Fernando Valley. And, we'd again been up in Sonora for all summer, so we knew him very well. We all lived there weren't any fancy hotels up there. There was like the equivalent of a Motel 6, if anybody remembers what that was. But But he would pedal over on his bicycle to our house on the Sunday to talk to my dad about the work that was going to happen on Monday, because that these things were shot in 3 days. They do 2 a week. They shot 6 days a week then, so you could squeeze in 2 of them. And so he'd pedal over on his bicycle to the house to talk this over, and whatever it was. And so that was always a big joke. The Lone Ranger's on his bike pedaling over here in his
Right.
shorts.
So, and you're a teenager?
Barely.
Barely.
I was probably 12 then, yeah. And the thing that was unusual about that is Jack Rather had just bought the company, the Lone Ranger Company. These things were traded like, these assets were traded like stock. I mean, you could go buy a whole picture company if you wanted, as we see it going on today. But he had bought the company, the Lone Ranger Company, and they were in black and white, because then there was no color television. So Jack Rather said, well, you know what? And this guy, he had money to burn. He owned the Disneyland Hotel then, and on and on and on. And he said, I'm shooting these in color. I want to shoot these in color. And it was these things only cost $25,000 a piece to make, half an hour Lone Ranger. And I think the color negative, which was not Technicolor, by then they had safety film, which was far simpler to operate with. I think that was like a $5,000 or $10,000 bill to each picture. They were going to make them in color. And as it turned out, when color came along in 1964, is that right? 64, I think. He owned all these a whole color series. So that was snapped up, and it's still on. You can see it today, and it's a kick to see them.
So you're growing up in this family where you're rubbing shoulders with people who are making TV shows and movies, and you get a sense for how that's going. You're able to just play around at a back lot occasionally.
Well, I don't know about play around, but what would happen is that, we would go to the set, as I say, not all that frequently, because it wasn't very special. But what I enjoyed doing is going to Columbia Ranch, because my dad had worked for Columbia like forever, and he went there and worked there. And Columbia Ranch was in Burbank. It's part of the Burbank Studios now. Time Warner owns it. It's about 50 acres right in the heart of Burbank. And it was fascinating to walk around there. I mean, you walk down the New York street and it was creepy because all the windows were dressed. You walk by a men's store, mannequins in the window, clothing on them all, cars parked on the street, and it was just like a neutron bomb had gone off. No people. But so yeah, and it was very interesting. I think the place that was fun was the ranches, and practically every studio had the so-called ranch out in the San Fernando Valley. And the one that everybody used a lot was Iverson's Ranch. All the westerns were shot out there. Also Spawn Ranch, and that's where the Manson murders took place. That's Spawn's. And some of them had sets out there. Corrigan had Fort Apache from the movie Fort Apache, and all that stuff was there. It didn't last very long because it wasn't built very substantially. It would just fall down. It had to be maintained. The paint would wear off of it and be peeling on the ground, and most of it was just the facade of the building. So
how did you decide, or when did you decide that this world of film and TV was something that you might like to pursue yourself?
Well, it was an interesting thing, Reed. Directors Guild, the aspect of a guild is that the father teaches his son in a guild. That's what in Europe years ago, what would happen in the shoemakers guild. You'd learn it from your father. And so initially, that's how it started. And when the guild was started in the late 30s, your father had to be in it, and he theoretically is the one who taught you how to do it. So, and you had to be of a certain age. You had to be at 21, it seems to me, or maybe it was 18. I don't remember. But as time went along, they then put more conditions on it. And by the time I got close to the magic age, they kept moving the age out. So you had to be older and, so they made it 21. You had to have a college degree. You had to, your father had to be in it. And then they put on a moratorium, no new members. So I went through that, and the thing that was interesting, these people got in it and didn't know anything about it. I had an advantage because just by listening at the dinner table, I knew a number of turns of phrase, shall I say, about what went on. And so you had to learn from scratch. But so I went through that, went through the moratorium, got an internship at Desi Lou. That would have been 1962, summer of 62, on the Untouchables, and spent the summer on that. And that was, in those days, Desi Lou was a big company, and they were just ripping. I mean, this would have been, had they kept going and not had their marital problems, they probably would have been Turner Broadcasting of today.
So did you have occasion to work with Desi?
Yeah, I did. And the thing that's interesting about it is that, and especially, I don't know how it is now, but then you had to be careful who you met when you were going up, because you might meet the same guy going down, or he might meet you if he was coming. And that's what happened with Desi, because I used to see him, look out my basement window from the print shop and see him arrive in the morning. And this was RKO Hollywood, the RKO studio, which is a very famous piece of real estate, then was and still is, I guess. I haven't been on that lot in ages, but he would come in usually somewhat 3 sheets to the wind at 9 o'clock in the morning, and not very functioning. And he would sit up in the office that Howard Hughes had sat in when he owned the studio. And but Desi, he was a great technician and a great filmmaker. Understood talent, understood a property. He'd look at a script and know, what he could do with it. But I think the biggest, most important thing that he brought is the 3-camera manner of shooting a sitcom. And Lucy, then they had 2 shows: Eve Arden show, which was Our Miss Brooks, and the Lucy show with herself. And he wanted to make this thing more spontaneous. He said, we've got to have an audience. And he said, I'm not shooting it on tape in New York like they are doing with Milton Berle, because they're terrible. They look horrible. You could not do a video recording in those times. That was middle 50s, until Ampex invented the videotape recorder, which I think was 54. So all that stuff came to the coast over the telephone wires in the form of a kinescope, which was nothing more than putting a 16 millimeter camera in front of the television and running it. After the thing was put to bed on tape, already it was done. And the quality was horrible. And as a result, there is no real video record of any of those things, except for some of the Jackie Gleasons, because he owned all of those, the kinescopes. But So Desi said, I want to figure out how to do this with an audience in Hollywood with film. So we have the quality of film. And so by then they had bought the RKO lot on Melrose, Gower and Melrose, right next to Paramount in Hollywood. And they start doing this. Well, huge problems. You can't, the cameras in a multiple camera show are moving all the time. And the lighting for it, for the cinematographer, was unbelievably difficult because of shadowing and so on and so forth. And further to that, the cameras that were used were the RKO cameras, which were beautiful. They were covered in leather, theoretically, to make them quiet. Didn't make them quiet. So they just, I mean, things sounded like a threshing machine, which caused the whole problem, as you can well imagine. So that was his huge contribution, I think, to the picture business, coming up with a way to do 3 cameras on with the quality of film. Now it's not an issue because you have things like Pixel and high definition video, and
They shoot with these things. They shoot with
sure.
these.
Oh, sure they do, and it's better than anything we could do.
Yep. Kind of amazing. So that was your introduction, quite an introduction as an intern.
Yeah.
To the complicated and fraught world of show business
right.
As a working stiff.
Exactly.
So then you did a lot of westerns, didn't you?
Well, that was kind of what you cut your teeth on. By then, I had moved on to Universal because that's where the opportunity was, and so westerns. I mean, we had tons of westerns. I won't even bore you. I mean, you could Virginian wagon train like that. So you'd get into that western rut, so to speak, and that was every week. And so so you'd know the actors in all of these series, know the crew members of all of the series, and then the production crew, meaning unit manager, assistant director, and camera unit, were different on each one. So that would be a different group of people. And it was something else. I mean, it was truly factory, and cranked them out. Honest to God, it was just absolutely amazing. And everybody knew what to do, how to do it, and lunchtime was a zoo. I mean, you'd go up to the commissary and you'd see people running around in Indian, Native American plains attire, with feathers in their sticking out of their wig or whatever. And it was an interesting place.
So as you reflect back on that, is there a particular show in your career that you found either particularly challenging or particularly rewarding?
Well, this is, yes. And we had just started making at Universal, and by then I was a first assistant director, and I had a shot on, we had just sold a new series to NBC called Project 120, which were 2-hour movies for television. And this was, this was really new stuff. I mean, and Universal, which was owned by MCA, which had been a huge talent agency and band booking business in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, had their hooks into all of this talent. It was unbelievable. And even though the Justice Department forced the dissolving of the talent agency, you couldn't own a studio and a talent agency also, and hire your own clients to be in the pictures you made. That disappeared, and most of these outfits decided to get rid of the agency and stay in the production business. We had people who were fabulous. I mean, as far as actors. And this just happened. I was the other night watching Turner Classic Movies, and it was Hitchcock week. And the guy was Mankiewicz was talking about um, um, Norman Lloyd, who was a great pal of Hitchcock's and who was also an actor. And they were going to run a picture on Turner Classic Movies that Norman Lloyd was in. And he says, by the way, he just had his 107th birthday last week. And I said, I can't believe this. So I had to go look it up on Google, and it was the truth. But I assisted Norman Lloyd on Companions in Nightmare, and that would have been 65 or 6. And that had Melvin Douglas, Ann Baxter, Gig Young, and Norman Lloyd directing the thing. So, I mean, and those were Academy Award winning actors. I don't know that Gig Young had won one, but the other two had. And he was a piece of work. And he was in the picture 2 years ago. I don't know the name of that, but I mean, 107 years old. Really a gentleman.
Now, I want to make sure that if anybody has a question here, they came with some questions for you, that they have a chance to ask them. You can open your microphone, wave at me, type it in the box if you have a comment or question. You are not the only Bellamy to be in your family in the industry. You were telling me your sister is still involved.
My sister is still involved, but I think my uncle was really the prime mover because he came from England right after the First World War in the 20s and went to work. And interesting, I saw a picture of him, photograph of him the other day. He worked for Vitagraph, which was the company that Warner's had to buy to get sound technology, and he worked for them. And then he went on to Columbia from there, and I think was instrumental in convincing my dad that that's where he should go in 1935, which was, middle of the Depression. And in the scheme of things, it was one of the few. There was no depression in that business, I'll tell you what. And the Dust Bowl people were all moving to California then, and they had a place to go to work. I mean, they needed everybody. And so some people found a niche and stayed in there and did well. But anyway, yeah, at the moment, my sister is the only one.
Eleanor has a question or comment.
Okay. A question. We all know or think we know what a movie director does, but what do the assistant directors do?
The assistant director is the, how can I say this to make, kind of like, the drill sergeant, the person who decides what work is going to be done, who breaks down the script, decides how the picture is going to be shot, and gets everything in order and lined up for the director to look at it and approve it and put in his 2 cents worth, and actually runs the set. I mean, tell everybody what time they're to be there in the morning, what actors you need in the first part of the day, tell them when they can go home and give them their call for the next day. And I don't know if that answers it for you, Eleanor, but that's kind of what it is.
No, so they do what we think the director does.
Well, after there's a little overlapping in there because the assistant director on a big picture also stages all the background action, which would be, whatever you see moving on the street is background action, and he's the person that sets all that up with help. I mean, you can't do it all yourself, but and the director works mainly with the actors and directly with the cameraman, telling him what the camera setup is going to be. And there were some guys, George Cukor being one, who was considered the ladies director and did some huge pictures, with I think his most recent one that was on Turner Classic Movies was My Fair Lady. And he had a production assistant with him all the time who would, Cukor never looked through the camera. he would stand behind it and say action, and he had other people who did that. And they were quite talented. They knew what he liked, and he didn't have to waste his time, fooling around with mechanical stuff. He spent it rehearsing the actors.
So, yeah, which is that's kind of an idea of a director in a play.
And he had been that first initially, in the 1920s when he came out from New York. Now,
Megan has a question. Megan, you need to unmute yourself.
Hi. Yeah, thanks, Earl. I was wondering what is it like when they were rehearsing in the 50s and it was break time and the actors were talking to the Native American actors? Was there racism back then, or was everybody just kind of together?
Megan, I don't think, as I remember it, that there was, it was a pretty happy family, and, you didn't really, some of these guys, where you might have had it was, if you had, to give you an example, we did a remake of The Plainsman. The original Plainsman had Gary Cooper in it. And so we remade it with people other than Gary Cooper. And we shot up in Utah, and we had a lot of Native Americans, but there were Navajos, Apaches, whatever was close around. And some of them came from a distance. They would camp there because, you'd have a situation where you might have 100 of these guys a day. And we had this was a big after lunch shot. The Indians attacked the cavalry, and they come charging through this field and on horseback. And we were accused of sending people through the field to take the cactus out of it, so that if anybody got bucked off, they wouldn't go face first into a cactus. Well, one guy did, and he just had these cactus spines sticking out of his face, and that was considered, not very considerate of the Native Americans, and that probably wasn't. And it's just that nobody thought of it. That's all. But and these guys would, you'd get to know them, and they all spoke. They all spoke English, and it wasn't. I mean, they were all educated. They went to school, so they weren't really savages by any means. And the thing that they thought was very funny, and this may be a shade of what you were talking about, we would have to bring all the stunt people from Hollywood then. So if there was a horse fall, a stunt man, and I don't know how it is now, but then owned his own falling horse and knew what to do to have it fall. So you'd say to the guy, "You see that spot over there? I want you to drop your horse right in that." And he could do it. Well, the Native Americans, we would bring sand in, make it soft so the guy wouldn't get, and the Native Americans thought this was hilarious. And they'd come roaring in on their horses and go right over, boom, on that spot, boom, boom, boom. And then you'd say, "Will you do this? We're going to roll the camera. Will you do it?" No. They wouldn't, they didn't do it, do it the way you guys have to do it and leave us out of it. But
we have a question again now from Mickey.
Let's see. Hi, Mickey.
You have to unmute yourself, Mickey? You don't have a question? I see Ed has a question. Ed, now you need to unmute yourself. There you go.
Like that?
There, I can hear you, Ed.
Earl, there's another famous assistant director here on Bainbridge, to Robert Altman.
Oh, yeah. Well, now he is He's a director, Robert Altman.
Yes, but the
Yeah.
second assistant lives here.
Oh, I see. I didn't get that part, Ed.
Oh, you were talking about assistant directors and what they did, the second unit.
Yeah.
And for Robert Altman, a man who lives on Bainbridge, the director himself, was Robert Altman's second director on Nashville and several other films.
Oh, no kidding.
Yes, Alan Rudolph.
Oh, yeah.
They live on Bainbridge here.
Now, I wonder, Rudolph, there was a Rudolph director.
That's his
It was
dad.
his dad. My dad assisted that Rudolph.
Really?
Yeah. And I don't remember Oscar. It was Oscar Rudolph is the dad's name.
Was it on the film with Lenny Bruce? That was Lenny Bruce's first Rocket Man.
No. I don't know what it was on. It was a very long time ago, though, Ed.
I was at Alan's father's house trying to buy all of his scripts.
Oh, is that right?
He let me hold it, the Rocket Man.
Oh, no kidding.
It's amazing.
You know, that reminds me of a story. I used to save from all the 2-hour shows that I worked on. I saved all the scripts, and as I moved around the country, as we all do, I guess, over time, I carted these things from place to place, boxes of them. I don't know what I thought I was going to do, but you know, dampness takes its toll on these things because they were all mimeographed, you know, and the quality of the paper was scrap paper and so on and so forth. So anyway, when I recently downsized, which was just like 5 years ago, moved to a condo, I had 11 boxes of these things, 500 of them in the attic. I'm surprised it didn't fall down in the house. And I thought, what am I going to do with these things? So I called up Olympic College and I donated them to the Olympic College. And some of these, I mean, in those times, as I was saying, because of the talent agency that Universal owned, we had some big stars in them. I mean, geez, you know. And I don't know what they're doing with them, but they've got them.
Doing a little web search, it looks like your dad and Oscar Rudolph may have worked on some Lone Ranger together for sure.
That probably was right. Yeah.
Yeah, kind of interesting how the lives weave. You were talking a little bit earlier about the idea of in those days, the picture industry being basically a company town event. So anybody who lived there worked on it.
Yeah, there were like, you know, really you had in those times, motion picture business, you had the beginning of aerospace, a lot of people who worked for Douglas and Lockheed, a lot of pilots, and then people that, you know, worked for, you know, the government, you know, and General Motors. I mean, there's a big General Motors plant in the San Fernando Valley then, and that was about it.
So even if you weren't deeply involved in the industry, you probably had relations with somebody who did.
Oh, I mean, every other house on our street, when we were little kids, you know, a guy was a carpenter at Columbia, a guy was an electrician at Paramount, a guy was, you know, something else over there, you know. So yeah, absolutely.
Rita, you have a question or comment?
Yeah, hi Earl.
Hi Rita.
What was your probably favorite? I know it's hard to pick favorite or your most enjoyable picture that you did. That you
you know, I talked to you a little bit before about Companions of Nightmare that was directed by Norman Lloyd. As a television movie, that I will say, looking backwards, was a favorite one. And mainly it was just a very pleasant company. And I said that Ann Baxter had been in it. And then I had occasion to work with her on another one, which was a Western directed by Don Siegel that had Sal Mineo and some other people in it that I'd have to look at my list to see who. But and then, it was right after that picture that I did some features. And I would say different, they're shot exactly the same way. I mean, there's no difference at all. There's electronic television, which we talked about a little bit, but then film television and a feature is done practically the same way. The difference is that features tend to have more money. They have a more generous schedule, and so on and so forth. So to answer the question, I think I only did about 4 or 5 of those, and one of them was a Western. It had Tony Franciosa in it, and another one had Paul Newman, and it was a race car picture. That was 1968, and so I guess I could say that one of those was a favorite one as pictures go, but a lot of these things got released anyway as pictures, and maybe not in the United States, but we had a series that was the ABC mystery movie that Spielberg got a break on, and he directed a picture called Duel, Duel, that and this would have been 68, 9 maybe, and those cost $400,000 to make one of those, and this thing wiped out the deficit on the entire series, which was substantial, I will tell you, because these things would run over, and it was released in Europe and just cleaned up. And that was from that he moved on to his now very extensive career, as we all know it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Earl.
Christina is asking about your father and how he came to Albuquerque. She's a New Mexico native, so she wonders about that.
All right, I don't see Christina on my list here, but that's okay. Christina, he had, what happened? He moved there in retirement. He moved to the Delta area of California first, mainly because he loved boating, and he moved. He ended up in New Mexico because he married a lady that had lived there, and so when they really got serious about retiring, they said, well, we're going to go to New Mexico and build a house, and they did that, and that would have been in I'm going to say 86, if that answers a question for you.
Yeah, that answers her question. She's giving you a thumbs up.
Okay.
So tell us, you spent many years. You spent basically your whole career at Universal, or?
Well, no, I started at Desi Reed.
Right.
As I told you, the internship. I was there for 2 years, and the internship, and then I went to the editing department, and that's when I got a call from Universal. This was in 1964. Can you come over to? This was on a Thursday. Can you come over and start work on the Munsters pilot on Friday afternoon? We're shooting all night. I said, well, I think so. I mean, I don't even know what the Munsters is. I never heard of it. It was brand new. And so I said, I'll come on my way home. I'll stop in and pick up a script. But I should clarify that before I went there, I had been over at Metro MGM for about a week before that. That was just a daily thing, finishing up an Elvis Presley picture. And so I went to do this Munsters deal. And that was the opening at the beginning of my time at Universal. And so 30 years later, I left.
And what were you doing when you left? What was your job at the end of your time there?
Oh, by then I was executive vice president of all the film television that we made.
So
And
that was a little removed from the set.
it was removed from the set, but I'll tell you what, and I used to say this to these guys because I said you can't do that job without having been on the set. You wouldn't know what to do, that easy. And so as a result, the people that succeeded me as time went along, and most of them had come from that direction. I have no idea who has it now, but had been on the set. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. I mean, obviously, in a way, we're getting a little bit of a renaissance of television because of Netflix. We're seeing people who are creating new series just in a different platform, and they don't have to combine. They don't have to live by the same rules that you did of so many episodes or even a certain length of time for each episode.
Oh, it was unbelievable. Yeah, I mean, there was a time when we made 39 episodes of a half an hour for a season.
Amazing.
No such thing as that anymore. But nobody would have guessed. Ted Turner was masterful, and because what he wanted was the software. And he bought the Metro Library. He bought well, I guess he got the Columbia Library, on and on and on. And the first person to ever engage in that, and they never really developed that talent as they could have, was Lou Wasserman, who was one of the founders of MCA. And he bought the pre-1948 Paramount Library, and that would have been in 1960, I'm going to say, for something like $50 million, which was just like, are you kidding me? There's not that much money in the world. And they thought he was cracked. What are you going to do with this? Well, every time you look at one of these things on Turner Classic Movies, it's one of those. And when you think that Ted Turner owns the negative to Gone with the Wind and Yellow Brick Road, which is what? Yellow Brick Road. What? Wizard of Oz.
Wizard of Oz.
Priceless pieces of art. You'll never see the likes of them again.
Karen, you want to jump in here?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask Earl, do you remember working on the Virginian?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, James Drury.
James Drury, yeah.
I had a huge crush on him.
You did?
Oh, yeah. So what was he like? I'm sorry.
Well, he was a pain in the keister.
Was he? Oh, well, but my bubble is burst.
Isn't that?
I'm sorry. But he, there were 3 guys on there, and he was the most difficult because he believed the fact that the series was named after his character, the Virginian.
Oh.
And but I'll tell you, this is an out of school story. Okay, they would be sent away because it was great publicity for the series on these personal appearance things, like a supermarket is opening in Las Vegas. We want to send the Virginian out there to have a personality there so people will come. That kind of a deal. Well, as an assistant director, this made me very nervous because they were always on the weekend. So they said one time, Drury is going to go to the Calgary Stampede in Canada. And it was leaving on a Friday night, fly up there, and then be back to shoot on Monday morning. I said, you know something? I don't like this at all. We've got a big set Monday, and who's to guarantee him being back? Well, no, it's going to be all right. Don't worry about it. Yeah. We'll see. Monday comes along. First, I walk on the stage. Makeup man comes over. We got a problem. I said, what's the matter? He said, Drury got in a fight in Canada, and he wore a hairpiece in the picture. He wore a hairpiece, but he had a big shock of hair, and this hairpiece went on in the back, kind of. And I said, well, I don't care what happened to him. fix him up. You're the makeup man. You know, he said, well, you won't believe it. I'm going to bring him over. He brings him over, and the shock of hair was ripped out in the fight. And he says, so we can't shoot. And I said, baloney, we can't shoot. Go see the prop man and get some black Shinola shoe polish. And so they put the hair thing on in the front, combed that back, and here's this big splotch in the back that still was a little raw and they painted that black with shoe polish that worked great. But anyway, so much for the story of letting people go on personal.
I'm just shattered.
Huh?
I'm shattered. My
So
hero.
much for going on personal public appearances on the weekend.
Thank you.
Yeah. But the guy who was really great was McClure. And he was Trampas, played the part of Trampas. And the other guy who was a great character was Clu Gallagher. And I don't remember what his role name was, but he was, we had several different owners of the ranch, you know. And I don't even.
Emmett Riker. That was his character.
Oh, was it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
We have another question here from Sheila.
Yeah. Hi, Earl. Thank you so much for doing this today. It's been fun. You mentioned Desi. What was Lucille Ball like?
You know, she was, he was a businessman. As it turned out, she became pretty darn good at business and was actually forced to, because about the time that I came to work there, they were in the throes of their divorce, which was a pretty bitter deal. But she was, you know, a nice gal. And in the scheme of, you know, whoever you might pass you on the way up the ladder, you might see on the way down. She finally came and did her series at Universal. So we did one of the iterations of the Lucille Ball show there, and that was much later than the original Lucy show. And I don't think the other Ethel was, I don't even remember her name now. Ethel was in that, but she knew her business, and there was no, you know, she had been a big star. Lucy had. She was under contract to Metro in the big stable of stars that Louis V. Mayer kept over there until the middle 50s, I guess. And she was in that.
Vivian Vance is the name you're trying to come up with there.
Oh, Vivian Vance. Yes, that's right. Absolutely.
And there's a question here about what was it like to work with Paul Newman from Terry?
He was terrific. He was very much an easygoing guy. Joanne Woodward was in that picture also, so he was a happy camper. His wife was with him all the time. And one thing that he got, I think, addicted to on the basis of that picture was car racing, auto racing. And he, because it was about Indianapolis, and he loved to get in one of those cars, and you know, he would go. And the NASCAR people ran the track for us, you know. So I just walk over to one of the guys. I said, "Put the yellow flag on him. He's going to hit something and kill himself, and we won't have the picture here." But as it turned out, Robert Wagner was in it too, and they did get in an accident in a race sequence up at Elkhart Lake, Wisconsin, where we had to shoot a scene, but they didn't get hurt, luckily.
We unfortunately are out of time, but Earl, this has been a delight. It's been really gracious of you to spend an hour with us, and boy,
Very
what
fun.
Great memories.
Very fun.
Great. Thank you all. And tomorrow,
Thank you.
Tomorrow we're going to talk a little bit about climate action. We're going to, Karen is going to be leading us in that discussion tomorrow. So I look forward to that. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks, Earl.
Bye-bye.
Earl.